Hi there, everybody, and welcome to today's AOP Live. My name is Philip Ideson. I am the founder and managing director here at Art of Procurement. I'm joined on stage to help me with today's conversation by my partner and co-founder here at Art of Procurement, Kelly Barner. Kelly, welcome to the AOP Live webinar today.
Thank you, Phil, and welcome as well to everybody that's joined us either here live or later if you're listening or watching on demand.
Yeah, now let's go through the logistics very quickly. So the conversations are all about, conversations. We only have one slide, I think, that we're going to put up today.
Yep.
But apart from that, it's really Q&A with our guests. And so we really encourage and hope that you're able to participate in that. The easiest way to do so is you'll see the chat functionality on the side of the screen. Just pop things in the chat if you've got comments, any questions. Both Kelly and I will be keeping a watch on those as we go through the conversation. Now, today's topic, we titled this Sourcing for Impact, Combining the Power of AI and Automation. We're going to look a little bit about the difference between AI and automation, what we've already seen from automation, and how and why some of those, the automation and then supported by AI really combined to give us opportunities throughout the procurement process that we may not have had before. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation. We're going to be joined by three guests today. We're joined by Rasmus Kiersgaard Nielsen, who's a senior manager of sourcing excellence within the global sourcing organization at KK Wind Solutions. We're joined by Diarmuid Cahalane, who is the data science lead at Keelvar, and also Kevin Neveu Jr., who's solutions consultant at Keelvar. And we're bringing up Rasmus, Diarmuid, and Kevin on the screen right now. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting us.
It's a pleasure.
Well, we always start an AOP, whether it's a podcast or whether it's a webinar, we always ask the same question, and today is not going to be any different. So I'm going to ask the question. I'm going to start with you, Rasmus. Did you find procurement, or did procurement find you?
I've actually been giving it a lot of thought because I know the question would come, and thinking about it, then I actually also think it's a little bit funny. I think I found procurement when I'm looking back to my study days when I was writing my master's thesis on the power of intuition during negotiation scenarios. And I needed to find some people who were exposed to negotiations. And then I had a guy in my network who said, hey, let's come to procurement. They are dealing with negotiations on a daily basis. I did my research there, and then I fell in love with the world. And then I joined it, and I haven't looked back ever since then.
The rest is history.
Exactly.
Kevin, how about you? How did you find yourself in this world of procurement?
I say a little bit of both. Started off in operations, customer service roles, starting out of college, early on, actually during the financial crisis, and getting those positions, fell in love with the kind of similar to Rasmus, fell in love with the procurement process into analysis, and now working at Keelvar, come to enjoy it. So I say a little bit of both. It kind of led me into procurement, and I'm happy, hopefully, here to stay.
And last but by no means least, Diarmuid, how did you find yourself in procurement?
Phil, I'm going to fudge here and say a little bit of each. It found me, but I think it's what I was looking for. I had a background in math, tech working alongside humans, and human plus AI, bringing value to business processes. And when I discovered an opportunity in procurement, I thought, hey, this is the perfect place to pursue this goal. So a little of each, I hope it's fair to say.
So I want to actually start by asking you the first question, Diarmuid. I think that your team recently had an in-person event with a number of your customers. And I'm sure that the conversations were pretty rich around the topics of AI and automation. But I wonder if you could just share kind of what did you hear from your customers as you were bringing them all together to share insights, to share ideas at that event?
One of the key themes that came out of our interactions at that event, Phil, was that people have heard the message and the promise, and they're now wondering, where's the value? What are the applications? How do we really get started here? And in due course, how are we going to measure that? What benefits do we really expect to see? But for just now, like, what are the use cases? Where does the rubber meet the road when it comes to the procurement and sourcing process?
Well, that's very interesting. I think we'd like to dig down into that some more today, because we hear the same. We're hearing that there is now growing understanding of the potential of AI in procurement, but as you say, it is about, okay, show me what it can do for me now. Where are the use cases? And so that I can start to think about practical applications. So definitely interesting as we dig into that. Now, I do want to bring up the only slide that we have of the day, which is a poll. We run a poll before each AOP Live webinar just to kind of see where our community is on a specific topic that's related to the conversation today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this out aloud for anybody who may be watching this later, who's listening to it on audio, who can't see the graphic that we have put up. And so the question that we asked was, which of the following benefits of AI and automation would drive the greatest process efficiency improvements for procurement? And so the results, being a LinkedIn poll, we can offer 4 different choices. The results are pretty overwhelming. So 72% of respondents said data cleansing and analysis, 11% said approval routing, 11% said content creation, so emails as an example, and 6% said project and task management. Diarmuid, do you agree with that focus on data cleansing as an efficiency play? Are these results kind of what you would expect to see? I'd love to know your perspective.
I've got to say, Phil, I was surprised at just the dominance of data cleansing and analysis here. Definitely expected. That's a very relatable thing when we think about AI. It often comes in the same sentence as data. We've often heard that getting our data straightened out is and analyzing it is an important first step in automation. So I can understand the association. What it may be telling us is that there's an opportunity for people to think a little bit more broadly about doing with automation and AI in procurement the things that are slightly less obvious. So getting into that area of decision making, how should the approval be routed? Getting into areas that we would have regarded as being perhaps the less amenable to automation, like that content creation or handling communications with suppliers and vendors. So I think it speaks to an opportunity here to broaden the lens as to where we might find those use cases.
Kevin, I think that data cleansing and analysis has been something that we've struggled with as procurement for a long time. As long as I've been in procurement, which 20 years plus we've been talking about this. How can procurement kind of sharpen the focus on data cleansing analysis as an example, as making the case for why we should be thinking about the benefits of automation and then AI supporting that automation?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, so definitely from a data analysis cleaning perspective, I see the need for it to help make those decisions clear. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made based upon the data that comes into the procurement organization, also the broader business users as well. So the ability to make those quicker, in my mind, with AI and also automation, can just make those decisions faster and more concrete in terms of the direction that the procurement users and also just the business in general needs to leverage.
And Rasmus, does this reflect your experience with automation and AI so far?
To a very large degree, at least so far, because I think that the data cleansing analysis, I think that's the no-brainer if we're looking at it from the past. I think we have heard so much about spend analytics, and this is where we have talked about automation. And I would also almost imagine that the first signs of AI, at least that's where it was communicated previously. So I think it makes really good sense up until now, at least. Because if we're looking at it in the future, then I think that there is a lot of areas, and one area in particular here that I think could have been interesting to add to the poll in regards to competence upskilling. I think that could have been a very interesting take on to see how could we utilize AI in challenging the way that we're working, and having some efficiency also in terms of ensuring we don't spend too much time on making these upskillings ourselves, but actually having something smart helping us thinking differently on new areas that we're not accustomed to working to.
So as an assistant, almost like a strategy assistant, pulling in lots of different data from various different places and helping guide some decision making.
I think it's definitely an assistant that could be utilized in, for example, making category strategies if you need to understand the market trends, the market insights that you would like to have. And then I think, as I also mentioned before, I'm a huge fan of negotiations. And I think in terms of negotiations, preparing for negotiations, but also role playing, it can be really, really hard to role play if you're not accustomed to that in your teams. And this is where I think AI can really help us to be a little bit creative and have someone challenge the way we think about negotiations.
Yeah, I think it's interesting where data cleansing analysis comes up, because I mentioned it before, we've struggled with this so much as a profession, and we can no longer put it to one side or think that, you know, good enough is good enough, because at the end of the day, if we want to be able to take advantage of the use cases that are available through automation and AI, for the vast majority of those, they require the data to be clean, to be able to actually get the use of to get the benefit of those use cases. Kelly, I want to just come over to you and ask you if you had any comments or surprises on the poll results.
It's interesting because, as you had said, the results are overwhelming. And here's what I'm not sure about. Did so many people say data cleansing and analysis because when procurement looks at AI and we think about what does this look like that we sort of already have, that's definitely the closest match. And so part of what I'm wondering is, with education and with even our own internal adoption, are we going to start to realize that there are potential impacts for both AI and automation, as well as the two combined, far beyond simply we think, okay, spend analysis. This looks an awful lot like spend analysis, but faster and better. I think as we get to understand what the true benefits are associated with it, we may start to come up with some more creative applications. Now, in terms of that educational process, Kevin, I'm curious, as you have initial conversations with customers, maybe even with prospects that are asking about incorporating automation into their procurement tech stack, their procurement processes, how educated do you find that they already are about what they want it to do, what they believe it's capable of, versus maybe following in on the wave or some buzz and saying, everybody else is getting this, we don't have it yet, we need to figure out if this belongs? Where are most procurement teams on that learning journey?
I would still say it's towards the tail end at this point, at least in my interactions. What is this going to do for us? What are some use cases that can help me and my team? Some see that already. Then you also have others who are, looking more advanced, like how does the AI come into play? But from an automation perspective, there's still some nuances around there. Some of the things we kind of talk about with these customers or prospective clients is around how much time it can save them. Like, we have customers currently today who save hundreds of thousands of manual steps within that process that they run today, everywhere from ocean freight, logistics, all the way to professional services, MRO. So it really runs the gamut in terms of the use cases and even the creativity of what automation can do, just to help out those users and help with those decision makings and that data as well.
Yeah. And one of the things that we also hear is that as much as we're all very specifically focused on, especially AI, a lot of these capabilities are actually already embedded in many of the solutions that we're already using, and we may not necessarily be aware of them. Do you find that in those conversations, even if companies are well down the road towards figuring out what they need, are they at times surprised to find out, when you think especially about automation, you're already using it or you're already benefiting from it in this way? Kind of going back to Diarmuid's point earlier about, we've heard the hype, we've heard the promise, we're looking for the value. Do you get to have those conversations about how it might already be in use for them?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we talk about their processes overall, where that may be happening, maybe what areas to exploit that a little bit more, so where there may be more friction as well. So yeah, we absolutely do look at processes internally that they may have. And even with the flexibility, a lot of the tools that are out there from an automation standpoint, how can it fit your business needs a little bit more closely to how you want to go in the future? And a lot of that flexibility as business changes, as your needs changes throughout the course of the process.
Yeah. Now, Diarmuid, Kevin says look at processes, but in my internal translator, I hear that might mean changing some processes if we want to benefit from AI, benefit from automation. Is there anything that tends to come as a surprise, either to procurement, or if we look at it a little bit more broadly, to the stakeholders and decision makers that they're working with, about decisions they will need to make, changes they might want to consider when it comes to really getting that full value from automation in their workflows or in the tech stack?
Yeah, I think one of the surprises, Kelly, can actually be that it's easier to get started than you might imagine. We've had this narrative for a long time that you might need a lot of data to train machine learning, to make automated decisions, or you might need AI to start, executing against your strategy. If we peel that way back and start with, let's take an example of automating something like a spot buy. You can actually, with a no-code solution like Keelvar Autonomous Sourcing, have a person who's never written a line of code in their life, who doesn't have any data, talk to the requesters, map out the process in a no-code way. They can run that through the system with no automation in the first instance if they want to. And as they become comfortable, different elements of that, maybe it's the supplier selection, maybe it's the approval routing, they can begin to put in business rules. They can begin to put in different automation there. And as this matures, yes, in the future, this can be driven by decisions based on machine learning, based on all of the data that you've now accumulated in the structured process. Maybe it can be driven, maybe there's a content creation step that's driven by large language models, but that's a shot in the arm, that's an enabler. I see all of this as plugging into an automation journey that can start very close to the process that you have today, except again, you've just mapped out that process with a no-code interface, and it's now running in a structured, digitized way, and you can automate those modules and you can make them increasingly intelligent as that matures, and as you find out where such an automated process works for you. Is it your spot buys? Is it the things that are high volume? Is it the things that are super urgent? But I think the surprise, to get back to your question, can be you can start very close to what you have today, and it's very easy to get started.
Well, and that's certainly not something we expect to hear, right? Usually we expect to hear the easy promises, the nice ROI, and then it's more difficult than we expect it to be. If procurement teams are starting with sort of this idea of efficiency and acceleration, once those benefits have been realized, I imagine we have to go to the next level, which is challenging ourselves to think differently about what we can do now that we've accelerated these processes and made them more efficient. How do we start to think differently about our role so that we're not just continuing to speed things up, so that we stop at some point and say, what does this allow me to do in addition, whether it's directly related to the process or the decision that we're automating, or whether it's time that has been freed up that we can then reallocate?
Is that to me, Kelly?
To you, yes, please, Diarmuid.
Sure. Well, I think once you've bought yourself some headroom, right? Everybody's being asked to do more, do it faster. You're not getting any more resources to do it. So take something that is high volume, is urgent, and is painful to deal with at the moment, automate that, and use the efficiencies there, as you say, to then kind of look around and say, okay, what next? Are we going to bring more spend under management because it's now easier to do so? Are we going to look to gather and analyze so the data that is now accumulating just naturally in this automated system, let's use that to do some retrospection. Let's spot other opportunities. Can we use that to tune up, let's say, our supplier selection? So now we're in the business of being more relevant to suppliers, getting more responses, driving more competition. So that's one type of benefit beyond just the greater efficiency in the as is. Now we're talking about bringing more excellence to more categories and to more types of buy.
Yeah. Now, Rasmus, it's going to be very interesting to get your perspective here, because what everybody wants to know more about is how is it working in practice? What are the kinds of results or value you've been able to deliver? Can you talk a little bit about your firsthand experience bringing automation to bear in your company?
Yeah, and thanks. I think it's a very interesting area, and if we're looking into KK Win solutions, we're basically forced to think into automation and also potentially AI in this case. So we are experiencing a huge growth, which also means that we need to think scalability in everything we do. And this is something that was luckily caught by some very, very competent colleagues of mine back in 2021, when we were also setting out for looking for sourcing software, which I'm also here now, ended up being Keelvar. So we have invested a lot in doing and automating our sourcing process. Back then, Keelvar didn't have autonomous sourcing, so we basically built an ecosystem around Keelvar, ensuring that we can automate as much as possible to ensure that our sourcing professionals spend as little time on what they would like to do, in this case, being able to negotiate with our suppliers and ensuring that, for example, our prices in the system is updated. So we have spent a lot of time ensuring that we can automate as much of these processes as possible. And that is some of those where we look into the way we have done it. We have ensured that with very, very few clicks and in very, very little time, our sourcing colleagues, they can go in and then can get all of the information that they need for a specific negotiation with a supplier, get extracted out of our ERP systems, get it uploaded into Keelvar, create an event within minutes, and then we can send it out to the suppliers. And then we have also ensured that we can then make the decisions that are necessary based on the events that we are having. And then also when we're then ready to award a supplier, we also spend very little time ensuring that we're getting all of this information automatically updated in our IP systems. So as an ecosystem that has been created surrounding our sourcing process, where we're utilizing Keelvar in a very big way. And now I think it's incredibly, I think it's cool what is coming out of Keelvar with the autonomous sourcing, where this is getting a lot more accessible for many companies, because we spent a lot of time ensuring we could do this. And now suddenly this is something where all of the hard work that has been done by my colleagues, it's getting very accessible to many companies. So highlighting also what Diarmuid says, it actually doesn't take that much anymore.
And yet to get to that ecosystem, you had to start by defining the business objective to accelerate your processes, to make information more accessible, to contextualize it. When you started to roll out the autonomous sourcing, did you select sort of, let's call them safe categories to begin with? How did you actually go through the process of figuring out, okay, here's what we've made the decision to implement. What is it going to work like when we actually put it into practice in real life?
And here I had some very competent colleagues who were running a lot of one thing is, of course, business understanding. So understanding what is our processes today. And then we also chose an area where it's very much related to our direct sourcing area, where we are seeing a lot of needs for our negotiations. And this is the key place that we have started and chose to focus on, because this is where we have a lot of interactions with our suppliers as it is today. And then now we're also looking into our indirect sourcing area. Our business is primarily within the direct sourcing area, and that is the key focus that we're running to ensure that the value add that we are having from all of this work is being put in there. We are unfortunately not using the autonomous sourcing of Keelvar, because we have built the entire ecosystem surrounding Keelvar. The delta is simply just too small when we look at what we have done, but we have also put a lot of resources and made sure we had a lot of people who could then create all of those apps ourselves. Yeah. And this is again where we're then looking into, this is not something you need to do anymore, at least to a certain degree.
So it's interesting then that your focus has been on the direct side as far as implementing autonomous sourcing. I imagine for a lot of people, especially if their focus happens to be indirect, that might almost fill in a missing piece of why has there not been a no-brainer place for us to implement this? Maybe depending on exactly what you're trying to achieve and the type of solution you're looking to bring in, directs is a better place to actually start with. But you've talked about, so you're not yet, but you're moving some of this functionality towards indirect.
Yes, that is definitely the plan, as we are also growing. We are a rather small company, or have been so, but we're also growing a lot right now. We're expecting that the revenue is doubling every second or third year. So our business is growing a lot right now. And that also means that we need to see today the indirect spend that has been handled in a very fragmented way. And we need to then look into our processes. How do we structure the way we do purchasing in here? And that's when we also look towards utilizing systems like Keelvar to then expedite the processes.
Now, you've been very complimentary about your teammates in terms of being able to bring this functionality and get value from it. what was it that either they already knew or that they took the time to learn to be in that position? Because I do imagine, whether it's operational expertise in the case of direct spend, whether it's category expertise in the case of indirect spend, there's material knowledge that procurement has. But as we start to leverage more and more of this, I don't want to call it complex technology, but let's call it emerging or advanced, we actually need to understand a little bit more how that technology works so that we can implement it. Were those skills already in place, or did your team go out and pursue the education they would need to put this into practice?
And it is definitely a lot of varying skills that needs to be able to do this work. So there was definitely a lot of emphasis in terms of bringing in people who would have the right technical mindset, who had a good understanding of sourcing, and then some people who could bridge our sourcing professionals and our technical people, ensuring that we also then deliver on the processes that we would like to deliver on. So it's definitely a big teamwork. I haven't seen someone have all of the capabilities and skills to be able to drive this journey themselves yet.
Yeah. Now, Phil, I can see while we've been talking that at least one question has come in. I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at it, but I thought maybe we would pause and see what input we're getting from the audience.
Yeah, and definitely, if people do have questions, please send them in, pop them in the chat. It was a comment really from Thomas when we were talking about data cleansing rather than AI helping with decision making. And there's perhaps a fear of being out of control, or feeling that you're kind of deferring something which is seen as a core procurement skill set to technology. And that may be something I'm sure that that folks are afraid of in the future in terms of their career. I look at this as being, it's about how we take advantage of that technology as opposed to that technology replacing us. And that's really where the opportunity is going to be. But I did have a question that I'm going to pose. In fact, it's a couple of questions. One I'm going to pose to Rasmus, and then one for Diarmuid and Kevin. Just kind of following on from the conversation that you both just had there. For Rasmus, as you were talking about using automation in the negotiation process, can you talk a little bit, as granular as you're able to, about kind of how that works, what automations are in place that support you in a negotiation process, or in an understanding, maybe data coming in to support your to support your negotiation process. I'm just really interested in how you kind of configure that.
Yeah. And I think that there is many areas that we also still need to investigate in KQN solutions. And if we put it directly into the scenarios of negotiations, then we are just in the very beginning here. But I think that there is a lot in relation to negotiation preparations. This is where we could utilize AI to find a lot of information regarding the suppliers, find the newest information that's happening on a global scale that might impact the supply chain, the way we do business together. So I think that there's something in relation to preparing for negotiations on data and having facts ready at hand. And then I also think that there is this in relation to upskilling. So let's just say role playing. If we're getting really good at writing prompts and kind of trying to describe the scenarios that we're having and the business relations that we're having with suppliers, AI has proven quite strong in terms of facilitating this dialogue, or at least a make-believe dialogue that can get quite close to true scenarios that we can see. And then we can use this to kind of walk through the questions we might have and the dialogues we might foresee with the suppliers.
So you kind of scenario, you're testing different circumstances and how you may respond, and having the data and all that kind of thing to be better prepared for negotiations. And negotiation planning is one of those things that we all recognize how important it is, and we all find that we don't have enough time to do it. Yeah. How many times have I shown up for a negotiation, 2 minutes before the call, and figured out, okay, I've got a negotiation on this thing now, and I never had time to plan it. So, Diarmuid, you're obviously working and see a lot of different clients who are using automation and AI. Are there any specific use cases that are kind of, the go-tos, the highest impact, where you see that if somebody hasn't necessarily started, they can start in a certain place, and that's really going to give them a lot of impact, which then helps them drive the business case for more?
Yeah, we would say with automation, go where there is volume, go where, it might be ad hoc requests that follow a similar process, right? So maybe you're supporting custom manufacturing, and there is an infinite number of different types of parts that might be required, but it's always the same process that it goes through. Or maybe you're doing spot shipments, or maybe it's very niche labor hiring, but it's always going to go through the same flow. So that is probably a good first use case. And also think about, what will success look like? It will look like getting good engagement from your vendors, from your suppliers as well. So think about categories where it's going to be easy for them, where the request might be just, one or two line items, so they can really, it's as easy for them to reply to the email in the moment as to put it on the stack, right? So if you give them 100 items, maybe they really do need 2 weeks to respond. But if you give them 2 items or 1 item, no reason why they can't close out that response really fast. And then you see the benefit of the automation where you're turning around the request, and you're after awarding, within that, let's say, 2-day window. So those would be, the types of factors we would encourage people to look out for when they really want to, just find an easy win to make the case, and then things can become more sophisticated thereafter. To that question which came in about loss of control in automation, and the other thing to say there as well is you can start where every single step of that process can be as high touch as you want it to be. You can have your approvals be high touch. You can have your supplier selection be high touch. You can have your award be high touch. But as you build confidence, you can bring that down to being lower touch, where the AI or the automation is making suggestions that the operator accepts. And then as the operator comes to trust it, they will eventually say, hey, what's the point of even checking this? I'm just going to go no touch on this step. So those are success factors that we would advise for, getting that first category and getting that first case win.
And so you can build as many guardrails as you want around the automations to make sure that it's not, you're not necessarily setting up a fully automated sourcing process that just engages and interacts with the stakeholder, for example. You can push certain use cases based on the spend profile. You can have certain checks and balances. So it's not an all or nothing.
100%. I mean, what we really need to get across here is that when we talk about the automated process, it is absolutely not one size fits all. It is a no-code drag and drop. I want an invitation module. I want to now route it over to somebody to approve it, or I want it to be auto-approved. Whatever your process is, you can describe that with the flow diagram, drag and drop. And then you hit go, the requests are coming in, and they'll flow through that. You can swap out modules, make them more or less automated as you go. So there's that total flexibility. Takes minutes to build one of these flows, so we encourage people to be super iterative, super experimental, get stakeholders involved in crafting this process, because it's super graphical and easy to understand and see the flows. So that's how we would encourage people to just get in there, get started. Don't agonize over which category. If it ticks a couple of those boxes we mentioned, grab it and start mapping it out.
Sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
I was going to ask, it's interesting the point that Diarmuid's making about high touch versus low touch, because as I think about the things we keep hearing about the procurement experience or the customer experience or the user experience, you could almost look at a standard procurement process now and flag the areas that we want to be high touch or that we want to be low touch. Where do our stakeholders want us to be high touch? Where they want us to be low touch? I bet you even to begin with, if you don't have any AI or automation at all today, there are places where some of that is misaligned. So I think it's kind of an interesting opportunity to rethink, how does procurement work with the business? How do they want us to work with them? There might be places where we think we're going to be high touch here because this is where we can deliver a lot of value. And the business is thinking, I wish they would just go away. This could be so much simpler. And it's not to say that we're going to say, okay, buy whatever you want from whoever you want, pay whatever you want for it. But these ideas about high touch and low touch, I think it extends far beyond sort of the tech piece of it. And it really starts to get into procurement's relationship with the rest of the business, which to me is interesting because it's a conversation that maybe we're able to have because we're bringing in some of these technologies that otherwise would be almost awkward to initiate with the business. So sorry to butt in, but just really sparked a thought with me there, Diarmuid. Really interesting.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah, and when I think about, one of our pillars for 10x procurement, how do we really elevate procurement is around the idea of overseeing 100% of third-party spend as opposed to managing 100% of third-party spend. And so often we get in trouble because we take this, we have to own this spend. And stakeholders don't want us to own their spend. It's their spend, it's their budget. And so that creates a lot of tension. Where when you're overseeing 100% of spend, it means that you're directing things to the right channel. You're having the right buying channel. You're having the right people involved at the right time. You're not getting in the way of things that you don't need to get in the way of. And when you start thinking about some of these automations and workflows, that starts to enable you to at least understand where spend is being, or where sourcing events are taking place, and where supplies are being used, and the decisions that are being made without actually having to be the procurement person, the procurement police that goes and says, I have to do that. I'm not going to let you go and do that.
Yeah.
Kevin, I want to come over to you just to talk about incorporating automation and the AI behind automation in transformation efforts. How do you find that the companies that you talk to are thinking about this as part of a bigger kind of broader transformation of procurement capability?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We talked to quite a few prospective customers and customers ourselves who are looking to really streamline automation and also the AI that comes within it. So just, again, kind of going back to helping that decision-making process that they have is a third-party information coming in to help with the automation flows that they may have. So it really is something that really allows they're really looking for it as well, just to make that process efficient along the way. And kind of going back to that, the previous point, you want to make it seamless with the business users. Business users make that process as efficient as possible, because business is moving extremely fast in most cases. So just be able to keep up with the speed, data is correct, and also have the correct information coming in to help make those decisions.
And we obviously, we've spoken about this through the conversation around. There's a lot of content right now around AI, and there's a conversation around, actually, I just want to understand the use cases. As we're kind of continuing our education around what AI can do for us and what automation can do for us, should we be really focusing on automation and AI itself, or it's more about the outputs? Don't be so worried about how it happens, but more look at what's your use case and what you're trying to drive, and what can technology do to help that. Like, how should we be thinking about educating ourselves on the art of the possible around this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. If we think about AI, at least in my mind, AI could be a help enabler for those decisions along the way, really to help with that, again, that business process that it's coming in with the business users, with the procurement teams that they are supporting. So yeah, that's kind of what I have in that area.
If I move on a little bit, Diarmuid, we've talked a little bit about humans and the need for humans to be skilled operators to allow them to get the most out of automation. Rasmus was talking a little bit about the journey that his team and the folks around him have been on. How should as procurement organizations, in your mind, you touch on a lot, and I'm sure a lot of different kind of maturity levels within procurement teams, how can procurement teams best position themselves from a skill set perspective to take advantage of automation?
I think if there's one thing we'd recommend, it's to have somebody who can champion and just have that idea of where the automation is going to fit in well, and help engage them with, say, category managers to spot opportunities. So we might refer to that person as the bot architect.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I almost don't like the term architect, because if we think about a building architect, there's a lot of engineering and technical knowledge and mathematics that they have to know in order to design a safe and efficient building. As I mentioned, for the bots, it's more a matter of taste than technicality, if you will, right? The tools to actually implement them now are drag and drop. It's spotting the opportunity, and it's working with those stakeholders to to see what mapping of their process is going to work nicely for them. So I think that would be one role that, depending on the size of your operation, depending on whether you have a center of excellence, that would be a role to keep in mind, or at least to have in mind that somebody playing that role when you think about an automation initiative would be good to keep in mind. It's going to differ depending on the size of the organization. We have customers that run the gamut from the biggest blue chips to mid-sized operations. Operators like KK Wind, very sophisticated on the tech front, and had the opportunity to build that in-house before it was available in the market even. But now that it's available in the market, I would say it's relatively democratized. And who's best placed to do it, might actually be surprising. We would say just get your hands dirty. And some people just like mapping out processes and like to see the flow diagrams and get a kick out of that. They mightn't be the most technically minded people, but they can do it now. Does that speak to your question, Phil?
Yeah, and I have a follow-up, but I'm just going to pause on the follow-up and come back to you in a moment, because there's a question that came in from Prashant that I think is relevant to this part of the conversation. I'm actually going to pose this, if you don't mind, to Rasmus. The question is, for a company to get started with automation, what kind of skills do their procurement professionals have, and how do you acquire those skills? So I just wonder if you could talk to kind of any opinion that you may have on the skills that help individuals become effective and ultimately experts in this area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, I think I would touch upon that specific question, and also relate it a little bit to what Diarmuid was just explaining now as well. Because I think if we're looking in and zooming in on automation, then I think some of those key skills to get started with automation itself is actually having a good process understanding. So understanding what is the task that we're doing, because I think that's the first steps in terms of then defining, okay, this is actually how we would want to do these things. This is the steps, this is the interfaces, this is the outputs that we're going to be seeing. So I think having a somewhat process mindset to see all of those ties that we need to draw to think automation. And if I should then put that into context a little bit to also what Diarmuid was saying in terms of skilled operators to have in certain areas, then I think we have been forced to at least to have really high efficiency in terms of utilizing the automation we've been working with. We have been forced to have very specialized teams, so certain people doing very certain things to ensure we get the efficiency out of the automation. And I think that's also where we're then seeing a little bit AI coming in, and where we maybe perceive the value of AI, where we are maybe talking about systems that can then start helping us. So I think at least with the future perspective here, then process mindset is definitely incredibly important to get started with automation. And now it's also about thinking, how do we then ensure that AI can come in and then be this assistant to us, so we can maybe reduce the amount of very specialized people that we have in our teams, and then make it a little bit more generic as well.
Do you feel that so the traditional procurement skills are that you're not necessarily looking for folks that have the traditional procurement skills as much as what we may have been doing in the past, and it's more around kind of a broader understanding and that kind of technical savvy, if you will, and understanding and curiosity that are aligned with some procurement skills, but perhaps procurement skills can be easier taught than that curiosity? Are those the kind of folks that you look to bring in?
I think we will not only get people in who are going to be extremely curious about this. And I think if we're looking at the core deliverables out of a sourcing or procurement organization, that's very much the emotional intelligence. It's in many cases, at least, being able to navigate in complex situations, being able to talk with the necessary people, both stakeholders, but also suppliers. So I don't think we will only be able to get in tech-savvy people. I think we need to see how do we complement each other in these cases. There needs to be people with curiosity when it comes to this, and that can be the early adopters. And if we don't have any curious people, then it's going to be really hard to start having some use cases. And then if you get someone in, then we can start proving the value, and then we can get it out to less curious people, but still extremely competent people in also the core deliverables.
And Prashant kind of qualified that as well by talking about technical skills. Do you find that with the low code and no code platforms that you don't necessarily need to know the ins and the outs of how automation works or AI works? It's more around how to use the tools that help you put together, the workflows that drive the outputs that you want. So it's more vision around that than knowing the specifics of how the technology that underlies it works.
And I definitely, if I'm looking back to what had happened in KK, we brought in people who had very, very good technical skills in the Microsoft Office environment, where we use Power Apps to create our ecosystem. Mm-hmm. That is not necessary in the same degree anymore as the software solution providers like Keelvar. They're coming in and making this a lot more accessible. So I think at least the very hardcore skills is getting reduced, but there still needs to be some people who can then also see through what it is that we require, be able to define the requirements, and be able to be the bridge between a software provider and also the people who need the support here.
Mm-hmm. Now, the question, and thank you for your kind of perspectives there, Rasmus. The question, Diarmuid, I wanted to come back to you about was you talked about it's relatively easy to build workflows, for example, and automations, and the low-code, no-code environments kind of enable it. That, in the wrong hands, can be dangerous from a going and doing too much and not getting the buy-ins that you need and experimenting too much. So I guess my question is around how should we be thinking about experimentation when it's relatively easy to set up the automations, but how do we kind of build a controlled environment to make sure that those are appropriately tested before being rolled out, or that we're not just trying to change things too often to see what works and the impact that has on stakeholders?
Yes, I mean, all the good old stuff from change management applies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Engage the people who you would hope to use it, make them feel like the request form that they will now be filling out as their initiate a piece of request, a piece of demand in the autonomous sourcing pipeline. Make that form work for them, make that form do as much of the heavy lifting with data sets, with lookups, etc., so that they'll really love that point of capture. We have a customer out there who has autonomous sourcing in the hands of all of their field salespeople. So as they're working up a deal, they're immediately sending out requests for quotation against the services they're going to need to fulfill that deal, so they can come back the next day having gotten their bids with their prices. So that's an example of really making it a powerful tool for that end user. And then of course the vendor is a user as well. In our instance in Keelvar support is available to both buyers and bidders. But also we would encourage people, reach out to your when you're trying this for the first time, reach out to a few vendors, say, here's what you log into, here's how we've set it up for you. Does that meet your needs? Is anything confusing? So no secret sauce there in particular, I think, Phil. Sorry to disappoint. It's the good old fashioned
no problem.
Management will engage the stakeholders.
Oftentimes that's just good reinforcement. Kevin, Rasmus talked a lot about the use cases and being applied to a lot of direct sourcing and direct materials. I know that Keelvar grew out of really focusing in the logistics space in the early days. Do you see that these kind of automations can be applied to any particular type of spend, or are there certain types of spend where where certain conditions exist, which are the most appropriate kind of categories to be thinking about driving these automations through, or leveraging these automations for, I should say?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't think we've really found a category yet where it probably will not be applicable. I think it depends, kind of as Diarmuid mentioned earlier, around the volume that you have. You really want these to have a lot of volume to get that additional information. You did mention logistics. Logistics is a big area where that does come into play. One thing it does also allow is just the flexibility as things change geopolitically. Panama Canal had water shortages. The Red Sea crisis that we're dealing with. Automation, even with those, let's say those shipments as an example, you're able to reroute those, find new suppliers that may need to bring those around different routes, just to help with the speed of business. And in terms of categories, I mean, logistics is a big one, but again, yeah, there really isn't any, I say category that I don't think there's applicability to. It's just got to find the right use case and the right process.
And so that's really organization by organization. What works best in your environment with stakeholders that are the most probably friendly or supportive of procurement and are interested in trying and curious in trying new tools, and where you find the biggest impact will be. And that may differ for each company. So I want to wrap up, Rasmus, just by asking you a question. It's related to change management, as Diarmuid was talking about that being so important. How has your organization adapted to the use of automation through the sourcing process, and any tips or advice that you can give as you've gone through and reflect on the journey so far?
And thanks for asking, Philip. I think that's a very, very good question, and I also think hard question to answer. I think in terms of the adaptation to it, then I think the automation we have done has been easing up a lot of the very administrative tasks surrounding sourcing. So in that place, then I see that there is a good reception to it. But then also, if I should then put it into context, that automation requires rather strict processes in terms of the way that we have built it, at least. And that also means that as we are growing, the way we're doing business is also growing. The different scenarios that we see is also growing, and the need for more flexibility is coming in. And that's actually where we then need to see how can we then keep the automation in there without making it too complex, because the automized processes can actually not get complicated, but if people don't understand what is it that's actually happening, how is this automated, what is the necessary steps to automate things, then suddenly there can be a mistrust in the process. And that's actually where it's really, really important that we ensure that people understand how is this actually working. So we don't start generating mistrust into the solutions, because there will be mistakes. There can be data quality issues. There can be many different issues that will show you as a recipient something that looks wrong. And if we don't understand the process and what is it that's being automated and how, then you will lose faith in the system and the tools. And that's something we need to be very, very cautious of. So I think that's one of the key advices from my side is to ensure that the stakeholders who are receiving this and benefiting from this also understands what is the necessary steps for this to work.
So just one follow-up on that. How important is it to document what you have done? And the reason I say that is I think about, even in our business, automations that we have used, and you build them in the moment and you know why you're doing them. And then there becomes a time when you maybe want to unwind them, or you want to think differently about a process. All of a sudden, you're not really sure where to start, because you've got all these automations that are individual automations, and you haven't really mapped out the bigger picture. Do you find that it's useful to document what you're doing as you're doing it, so that you can rewind things or figure out where issues or problems are when those occur?
I think last year the size of global sourcing doubled in terms of personnel, and then we quickly realized that not having documented everything was a huge issue, because training and onboarding persons, that was actually quite a hard task, because everything was tribal knowledge. So we very quickly realized that having the lack of documentation maybe actually had it on the big picture, but then on a little more granular level, we were missing all of this documentation. And that's something we simply just lie down our backs and then say, we need to do better here. And then we're actually spending 2024 on making sure that our documentation is getting to at least an acceptable level, because we can spend all of the time that we want on documenting things. So we also need to find the right level, but it's crucial. It is crucial.
All right, I know it's about time to wrap up, so I do want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Rasmus. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Diarmuid, for joining us, sharing the benefits of your experiences, your expertise with the AOP community on this topic. I think that it's going to be really interesting as we kind of go from that level of, all right, we understand what AI and automation can do for us. Let's now talk about the use cases, because that's where the action is going to be and that's where the impact is going to be. So really interesting conversation around that. And also want to thank everybody for joining us as well in the webinar. We really appreciate you coming and listening to the team here. And of course, if you have any questions or anything like that afterwards, feel free, you can reach out to us directly. We'll connect you with Rasmus, Kevin, or Diarmuid, or I'm sure you can reach out to them more directly too. So with all that said, thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.